In this video, we will discuss how to use the Maarg platform as a reader and then as a writer. To start with, we can search for a username. We see a list of all the marks written by this user. Over here, we see a preview of what has been written. Each mark has some essential components. The topic here, it can be a question or an opinion. The purpose of the mark is to help you evaluate these outcomes as a possible answer to the topic under discussion. The Maarg writer uses a series of arguments comparing each outcome on various decision factors, helping you decide which outcome best fits your values. Unlike other media platforms, on Maarg, writers share a structured thought process behind the decision, not the decision itself. A good Maarg, therefore, is not about popularity, but instead the depth of the arguments and the quality of research. Because Maarg is a text-based, unmoderated platform, on this summary page, you can preview the quality of this Maarg before exploring it any further. Well-written Maargs will have evaluated all the options using as many practical factors as possible. Observations are generally data that are backed by research, and inferences are the reasonings using those observations. For example, in this mark, the writer could have used yes or no as the possible outcome, but instead went with three outcomes, using four factors that seemed important to the author for making this decision. An important aspect of any argument is a set of agreeable definitions. In this example, the mail ballot program, for example, can mean different things depending on your state. So it is important to define those upfront. In addition to the definition, context is also important to understand the right audience, like the geography and the time frame used for the arguments. Many online arguments happen simply because even the commonly used words like religion and terrorism have no standard definition, and therefore everyone projects their own meaning in their arguments, leading to conflicts. For reading the mug, click here to explore. A reading session is a guided tour of the map of arguments laid out by the author. Once you start, you can continue offline. In the end, you can generate a learning report to see how this mark changed your opinions. You can explore each mark multiple times, but we offer learning reports for the first three tries only. So let us start by reading the mark. We can revisit the definitions and the context. Jump to the next section. We can now start by rating the importance of each factor in our decision. Your response will not be shared with the writer or other readers, and you will not know the author's response either. This means your decision may be very different from author's decision even if you agree with all the arguments presented by the author. So this is just an example, and I'll put some random values here. Move to the next section. In order to understand the impact of a mark and how it shaped your opinion, we need to know your views before reading the arguments. You will rate each outcome again after reading all the arguments. The difference in your views is used to generate a learning report for you. Now, the lead learning report and all your responses are exclusive to you, and the writers will not know your decision. So, again, because this is just a random example, I'm going to put some random values here. Right, so we are now good to start navigating the argument map. You will be presented each observation and inference in the order designed by the author. Observations over here are basically snippets of data, ideally backed by some citation or source. Your agreement or disagreement will help you understand if the argument uses some bad reasoning or some bad data. Now, this granularity will help you and the writers understand exactly where they went wrong instead of claiming an argument to be completely right or completely wrong. Authors will get an aggregate report of each disagreement that may highlight they are using a bad news media source in their argument, and thereby they can always go ahead and change a new type of media source or a news source to make a compelling argument. Let us put some random values here. You can always say if you don't like the source or if the author has intentionally used a misleading quote. So you can keep moving in this series of observations until the inference. Inference is the reasoning of the actual argument of the author. So press next. In this example, you do not have a reasoning. The author has not given a reasoning, but we can press next to move to the next inference. And in this inference, we can see some logical reasoning presented based on the observations used by the inference. You can always jump to the specific section for observation or inference. In this case, we can always move back to the first inference, and you can always exit the quiz. After exiting the Maarg, you can always resume the session because it is stored locally. Now let us move to the point where I have reviewed all the arguments. Now this brings us to another section called koans. So over here you can see the inferences that I have disagreed with. Koans are written by Maarg authors as a persuasion technique to convince you to agree with their inference. If you already agree with the inference, the koan may not help you much, but if you disagree with the inference, the koan can help you think again. So here, since I have disagreed with this inference and I can select why I have disagreed, let us say I've selected the first option. Now, just as we try to convince people around us, Cones uses a set of questions as a quiz, starting from some agreeable points and then concluding by challenging our disagreement. The Maarg author hopes if you agree with all their inferences, you may ultimately agree with their decision as well. So in this case, we can just continue playing the quiz by selecting something that may seem logical. And once we are done with the quiz, we are basically proving the author has tried to prove that the inference they have written is also correct. Once you are done, you can always replay the quiz, or you can change the inference vote to say yes, you agree. Since cones are optional, so let us skip, and then we can talk about the next section of re-evaluation. As opposed to the first round of evaluation, this time the author has written a short conclusion trying to rate each outcome based on each factor. You will not know the author's scores, but based on their arguments, you may take some approximate guess as to what their decision is. Let us rate these outcomes again. And these scores would normally change, or at least ideally change, if the author has done a good job of convincing you. So we are in the last stage of submitting this session. You can always jump around and change any of your opinions or any of uh, your responses submitted before. But this is the stage since we are back to the publishing section. At this stage, you need internet. You cannot work offline. And on clicking here, you will be able to generate the learning report. Now, this brings us to the learning report. You can always access this again, going from the Explored section. Out here, you can see the submissions. And as you can see, this is the first attempt, but you can have multiple attempts as well. Let us load this now. Now we can see a new session. Over here, you can always go back to the inferences that you have previously submitted. Similarly, the evaluation and the observations also include how you have responded. Right. Um, we also have a map. So over here, you can actually look at this graph showing how you navigated this map of arguments. So clicking here, you can see the votes that you have given for each inference. On hovering, you can see the exact inference. If you click here, you can always see the observation and whether or not if you disagreed with it due to the lack of trust, meaning the observation was using some bad news media source, or it may be using a bad context. You can always keep clicking and trying to understand what is the root cause of your disagreement. If you decide to share this image with the author or someone else, they will have a much better understanding of what exactly they have to do to convince you to change your mind, or if you can give them a feedback saying what they should do in order to change their opinions. We can also take a look at the results, which is the learning report. Let's talk about the first section of scoring. You can always take a look at your responses for each of the outcomes and your scores for each of the outcomes. Based on your scores, we generate this learning report. So, looking at the scores, we try to normalize your scores in the range of -3 to 3. And out here, you can see the winner for you. You went with the item E2, and which is basically saying reform without suspending. The outcome with the highest score wins, and the argument is considered your decision. Ties are naturally possible. It is also possible that all the outcomes here have negative scores, which would mean that you're not happy with any of those outcomes, but your decision is about picking the least bad option. And this is helpful most of the times when you're struggling with decisions where all the outcomes look bad, but not making a decision is also not an option. If I load another session, you will see a different set of results here, where the rankings have changed. Before, the option number in the E1 option was basically ranked number 3, but after reading the mark, uh, the reader opinion changed, and that became the number 1 opinion. So we do indicate these changes in decisions, but in addition to that, we also use a little bit of maths behind the scenes to figure out exactly which opinions or how many opinions were changed. Over here, you'll get a short summary over exactly on based on the number of observations and the factors how you have voted. We generate this report, and in the end, you can see that previously your decision did not have any match, but after that your decision matched exactly what the author was thinking, and this basically is the ideal state for the author when their mark was able to convince you to change your opinion. If we switch to the evaluation or the inferences, another thing you will notice is that we do not show any numbers indicating how other users agree or disagree with a certain opinion or an inference. And this is basically because we believe your opinion should be independent and not driven by popular votes like we do on social media. But one number we do show is basically the feedback on the citations over here. So remember, observations are merely data. If many users think that the data source is not trustworthy or the citation has been misquoted, this number usually suggests you to double check this information on your own, and this helps as a tool to fight fake news. We do not yet have a discussion forum, so these links for now will take you onto Reddit as a discussion forum. So we are currently exploring a mark that has been written by someone else, but even as a writer of the mark, you can explore this mark just like any other reader, and you can also generate a similar learning report as if you are exploring someone else's mark. Let us switch to the mark writer view to understand what data or what information does the mark writer receive. So we reviewed how to explore a mark from a reader's perspective. Now let us switch to the author's perspective. You can find all your unpublished drafts and published marks over here. On the Publish tab, you can click on the item to load the mark. So we can now either load this mark or explore this as a session. Before we load the mark and see the full report, it's important to recall that the purpose of a mark for a writer is to convince the readers to change their minds. And our reports help you find which arguments are working in your favor and which ones are not. So, if we look at the Inference tab, for example, this tells you how many readers agree or disagree with your logic. Similarly, you can also look at the Observations tab, which is basically the data for your inferences, and you can also see how many users agree or disagree. and why do they disagree with a certain observation. If you see many readers disagree with an observation, you may want to find a more trustworthy news source to make your arguments more powerful. Similarly, in the cones, you can again see the convincing power, and over here you can also see you will not be able to see how many users actually voted for each argument or each question, but this just lists the question series that you offered. If we shift to the influence tab, as a writer, you can see your original responses that you entered while writing or designing the Maarg. You can also see your own decisions as to which option was the winner. In this case, the option E1, which is suspend until reformed, this was your decision, and it looks like it was a close fight between these three options. And since the numbers are not extremely high or extremely low, it sort of means that you are not so sure. But given the low rankings, eventually this option is the winner. But you don't just want to know how you think about the Maarg decision yourself. You also want to see how others think about your Maarg. So we generate ranks for each of the outcomes, as you can see here. For the first outcome, this was the first outcome, you can see the report, and you can see the ranks. Since there were only three outcomes, we have three ranks, and you can see what was the rank before the users read and after the users read your Maarg. And so this not only gives you a perspective of which outcome is winning, it also lets you know which are the second best option and the third best option and so on. And this kind of helps you improve your Maarg. Let us say you were hoping that more readers try to change their opinions to make this option as the number one option. You can track this better. Finally, we also generate some a summary of what exactly how your readers feel after reading the Maarg. So you can see how many users changed at least one opinion, and how many changed their winners, which is the rank number one, and so on. You also get an agreeability score as to how many people have a similar opinion as yours. Now, these all the rules for generating these numbers are currently under discussion and under development, but we will be discussing this in more detail in a subsequent session. If we move back to the objective tab, you can see one important thing about the stats generated. As you can see, these are generated using the first attempts of 16 users for now. Once you exit, you can also see these numbers over here. This is somewhat an important number because these stats are not generated automatically. The writer has to go to this tab and then generate this manually. So we have seen how to read a Maarg and how to utilize the learning reports and statistics to improve. Now let us discuss how to write Maargs. You can start by a local draft and publish. So over here, you can see some pre-populated options that you can edit and publish. You will be able to see a map of any arguments that you have already written. But there is another option which is editing an already published Maarg. So here we copy and edit, and you can see a new draft has been created. So I wrote this demo Maarg that can be used as a reference, but do note that this demo is full of hypothetical arguments, and we do not endorse any opinions presented here. Before I start, it's also worth noting that writing is a creative process, and the approach I'll be discussing is just one of the many approaches that you can follow. Our platform just provides you a skeleton or a framework and the ability to measure the impact you're writing and become a better writer, hopefully. So we start with a topic that can be a question or an opinion. As a writer, you have a set of outcomes that serve as a possible answer to the question. Now, broadly speaking, there can be two types of writers or two types of writing purpose. You may be doing a fair analysis of each outcome based on the factors that you believe are important. This is more of a researcher's approach or a policymaker's approach. The second type of writer may be a lawyer, a debater, or a salesman who have already made up their decision and they are trying to convince the readers why their decision is correct. Your outcomes and factors may reflect your approach. So, for example, in this mark, I could have used only two outcomes, ban or continue. If, let's say, if I was writing as a politician or an opinionated person, but I went with three options that seemed more practical and implementable. Similarly, the decision factors should also be an exhaustive list in a good mark. It does not really matter whether you find a factor important. Your job is to find all the factors that may be important to a diverse set of readers. If you recall, each reader decides which factor is important to them. You do not make the decisions for them. However, if this mark was about comparing two ideas where, let's say, you wanted one idea to win, you may pick factors that favor your idea over the other. Your readers, however, may be able to detect such a bias, so this needs a good amount of practice. For a good debate, all debaters should agree on a common set of outcomes as well as a common set of decision factors. We have discussed the importance of definitions and the context, but I think it's worth re-emphasizing these. So, majority of the arguments that we observe are mostly a result of a diverse vocabulary where two people mean different things when using the same word. So, what you should do is try to define in your own words any important phrases used in a mug. In this example, I have defined mail ballots because this program means different things across all the US states. I have also defined what I mean by short term, and this is because short term can obviously mean different things for different people. Similarly, if we talk about the context helps readers understand the time frame and the audience type. In this example, I'm talking about US elections, so someone from, say, China may not be able to follow stuff that is being discussed here. This section is the premise of your marg, so this is very important to your readers as they will decide to read the full marg only if they agree what is written here. So this is basically setting up the stage for a good debate. So you have to figure out uh, writing stuff that is sort of agreeable to most people, and then start about with the other inferences and your arguments that we will discuss next. There are three major components of a mark: your arguments as inferences, the data backing those arguments, and your concluding remarks on each outcome. So, this format may look very similar to how we write research papers or editorial opinions. This format is also followed in debates where each debater presents a comparative evaluation of each outcome, where outcomes are generally limited to two. Like, for instance, a debate can have a debate on just yes or no, or agree or disagree as two outcomes. In this mark, although we have three outcomes, and we have written concluding remarks for each, discussing how that outcome scores on each decision. Now, your readers will not see your scores. They will just read your evaluation and rate each outcome on their own. Even if readers agree with everything you have written, and scored each outcome as you have, their decision may still be very different from your decision because they value some factors differently. This means, as a writer, you are only helping your readers make good decisions by writing good concluding remarks, but you're not telling them what is good for them. So, in here, we can just go edit, and based on your concluding remarks, you can rate these things as terrible or accident. Higher is better. Moving to inferences, in a research paper or debate, every line or set of lines can be thought as a writer's argument, the where the writer is either quoting some facts or sharing their personal experience or using their logical reasoning skills to deduce a hypothesis that can be challenged by others. Now, each inference has a logical reasoning applied to a set of observations that justify every line written in the observation, in the reasoning. The observation should be ideally backed by trustworthy sources that your readers cannot dispute. So over here, you can see I have included a YouTube link. However, if you do not include a citation, these observations are considered as opinions. Now, observations can be thought as a summary of news with a snippet as a quote. So be careful not to write out of context quotes because your readers then may disagree with the observation. As a writer, you want your readers to agree with your inferences that will make your readers agree with your evaluation, which increases the chance that they may score these one outcome better than the others, and therefore their decision would be similar to yours. It's okay to use a diverse set of observations from different media sources, even if you are repeating the same news, because readers may disagree with one news source, but they may agree with another. So remember, your goal is to convince your readers on your arguments, not the data. In other words, your readers have to be convinced on your inferences, not the observations. So we have discussed these three sections, but the question is, where do we start writing? In what order? Now, as a creative process, it kind of depends on your writing style and the purpose of writing. So, for example, if you have already made your mind on each outcome as a politician or as a debater, start by evaluating by evaluating each outcome on each factor. Your evaluation should prompt the readers to rate your favorite outcome excellent on all the factors, and the other outcome should be scored as terrible. After writing the conclusion, try to dissect each line as an inference. Your readers will obviously challenge or disagree with every line of your evaluation. The advantage of creating an inference is that inferences allow you to understand exactly which arguments are resulting in your readers leaving unconvinced. So format each inference compactly in one line and use the reasoning section over here. Use the reasoning section to explain um, any logic that you may have. Now, again, it is possible that your readers will challenge every line written within your reasoning. So it is important to therefore include supporting observations or credible sources of observations to guide your uses. So you can see this approach is something that we call top down. We start with what we believe in as evaluation, then we try to provide reasoning for those evaluations as in the form of inferences, and then we end up finding data that justifies what we believe in. So this is the reason why we call it top down. But if you are a researcher, you may not start with a preconceived notion. Instead of writing an evaluation, you will most likely read various sources and add the most relevant ones first as observation. You can then build logical arguments by composing one or more observations into an inference. Finally, you may write the evaluations based on inference and then rating those outcomes in your evaluation. So, this process is something we can say a bottom up process. There is also a third approach, which is somewhat similar to how we write today. The inferences are listed in a natural storytelling order. So we try to group any controversial takes into one separate inference or like one paragraph of an essay. Now, similar to what you see in the research papers or Wikipedia, each inference can be linked with citations from trustworthy channels written in the observation section. Now, finally, you can write a conclusion in the evaluation section, and this conclusion should have precise points on each factor and each outcome, helping your readers score each outcome easily. Again, this process will look similar to how we conclude our essays today. So this approach is something that we can call middle out, since we are starting with the inferences in the middle and then fanning out to observations and evaluations on either side. While writing, you can also see a visual representation of your mark and the path taken from observation to evaluation. So, obviously, when you are writing a mark, you are ensuring that you are basically agreeing with everything. But out here, you can also see that this particular observation, O12, does not have, it's basically an opinion. This is why it's marked in orange. Out here, this one, O11, has a different meaning that we say it's with citation. So it's important for you to understand the path that you are taking from one inference up until your decision point. Let's move to the Publish tab. So before publishing, you can add other usernames who have collaborated with you just to give them credits. You can also publish this Maarg privately over here. So you can see there are two modes. It can be a protected mode or it can be a public mode. What this means is that if you make this private, only you would be able to explore the Maarg as a reader, or you can specify up to 3 people who can explore this before you go public. After submission, this draft is not automatically deleted, so you can always make changes and publish a new Maarg. You cannot, however, edit a published Maarg except a few items. So let us take a look at those. We'll move back to the designed section. So I'm already seeing a published Maarg, and out here we have an update section. So this section is for informing your users about any corrections or other Maargs as recommendations. This brings us to another important aspect of decision making, which is persuasion. Now, debates do not just end with a conclusion, right? We oftentimes have disagreements, and we want to understand why our readers disagree with our arguments and help them with a new perspective that can change their mind. So, koans are a persuasion technique built as a series of questions. I think we can take a look at the previously written koans to understand this better. We have a series of questions. So, based on the inference, the writer sort of foresaw what are the possible reasons for disagreement, listed those reasons, and then depending on the reason, for example, this reason, we are listing a set of questions in order to persuade the reader to change their opinion. So, as a writer, your goal is to guess possible reasons of disagreement on your inference. And we believe most self aware writers know which of their arguments are controversial and why. Now, just as we do in person, the art of convincing is to find something that is extremely agreeable and then guide the readers step by step to reach our conclusion. These questions can have up to 4 options, but we believe two should be enough for most of the koans. Readers can play the koans multiple times, and a good koan should challenge your readers in a way that they decide to agree with your inference, which will inevitably help them agree with your evaluation, and therefore they can also agree with your decision. And that is the purpose of what you're writing. So back to the editing section, you can see you can select any of these inferences, and then you can add a koan. Based on the koan, as I was saying, you can add different reasons, and for each reason you would be, so for just for example, if I write this reason, you would be able to add a series of questions and select which are the right answers for those. So I hope by now you can see some differences between Maarg and the other writing and debating platforms. We are not a content distribution platform like social media or newsletters. Our goal is instead to build a decision oriented debating platform that does not just list pros and cons and does not necessarily divide us into two sides without really understanding the concerns of people who disagree with us. Our readers learn a diverse set of thought processes and measure what they learn as well. This enables our readers to better understand the challenges faced by the decision maker, like our politicians, even helping them shape their policies better. Our readers are also not in a populism contest anymore, because how you think is more important on Maarg than what you think. Now, by breaking down their arguments in a structured framework, our writers measure the real impact of on the readers, unlike measuring like and share counts on social media. The precise feedback from readers also helps writers understand the areas of weakness in the thought process and improve their arguments. So, I hope this video got you excited about writing on our platform. We would love to know your feedback, and if you would like to see any new features or any improvements to the framework itself, we would definitely love to hear that from you. Thank you so much for your time, and we are really excited to have you on board.